Every time you tune in to 702,
you're not just listening,
you're making a difference.
We turn words into actions that change communities
and bring us closer to the South Africa we want to be. Every step counts.
So keep walking with us.
702.
Let's walk the talk.
Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app, DSTV channel 856
and 92.7 and 106 FM. Burning questions.
Insightful answers.
Listener's choice.
With Clement Manyathela.
So, Listener's Choice is an opportunity we give you as the Clement Manyathela Show. We give you an opportunity to recommend any topic you want us to discuss. That's why we call it Listener's Choice, because it's a choice you make as a listener. So, if there are topics that you feel that we have not focused on a lot, or we've not explored sufficiently, and you want us to bring in experts, guests who can explore that with us, just send me an email on cm@702.co.za. That's cm@702.co.za. Tell us what your choice is as a listener. And what we do is we will put all these topics at every single Wednesday at 11 o'clock. That's the time we allocate for such conversations. And it can be a topic about anything. We've spoken about different things that have been suggested by listeners on our Listener's Choice feature. So feel free to send us your suggestions or topics you want us to discuss, especially those we've not discussed or we've not really focused a lot on. cm@702.co.za is the email address to send those to. So today we're looking at how much South Africans spend on transport. One of our listeners asked that we look into how much we spend on transport, especially the lower working class who depend on public transportation. So we've got a guest that we've invited who will paint the national picture for us. I mean, whether you are commuting to work or you are getting your kids to school or you're just trying to make ends meet, transport costs they actually play a huge role in our daily lives, and they're astronomical. And you see that in our monthly budget. And it doesn't help that we have forever rising fuel prices. And yes, sometimes they do come down and then they go up again. And the public transport system is virtually not functional. There's, in fact, recent data that reveals that nearly 60% of Gauteng households spend more than the recommended 10% of their income on public transport. I mean, nationally, the situation is equally concerning, with the latest household affordability index indicating that the average worker allocates over 57%, over 57% of their monthly earnings to transport and electricity combined. So I'm interested to know from you how much you spend on transport monthly, whether you're using public transport in a form of trains or taxis, buses, or you are driving in your own car. How much do you spend just on transport monthly? Give us a call on 011-883-0702. The WhatsApp line is 072-702-1702. Professor Rose Luke is a transport economist with the University of Johannesburg who's going to guide us through this, Jed. Prof, thank you for making time for us. Good morning.
Hi, good morning, and good morning to all the listeners as well. So thank you very much for having me here.
Yeah. So before we even look at just the general picture of the current state of transport costs in South Africa, I suppose we also have to talk about infrastructure, because when you are traveling in Europe and you see how functional their public transport is, or even in America, in places like New York, where they use the sub, it's so cheap, it's so convenient, it's so functional. You realize that there's actually a lot of money people spend in this country on transportation, especially transportation to work, because we just don't have proper functioning public infrastructure.
Yes, I think I can agree with you wholeheartedly on that. And I certainly don't think that one can discuss transport costs without thinking about transport infrastructure and how it influences those costs. So yes, I think certainly we need to, if we are going to look at costs, we have to look at the state of the roads. We have to look at, just functioning traffic lights, for example, but also our public transport infrastructure, our rail system, our either taxi ranks, stations, bus stops, all of those must be factored into it. But just the state of the roads and the potholes must surely also have a massive influence on costs. So I think we can't separate the two. If we are going to discuss costs, we must discuss the state of infrastructure as well.
So what's the general picture of just the current state of those transport costs in South Africa, whether it's people that are, driving in their cars, people that are using public transport? How are things looking?
I think we can safely say that our transport costs are very high and too high. I think you mentioned earlier that when we're looking at developing economies, there's usually a benchmark of about 10% of household income that we should be spending on transport. In South Africa, you're frequently looking at, some people have quoted an average of 16%. I know of a lot of people who are looking at 20-25%. And that's a lot of money and a huge portion of your income to spend just on transport, bearing in mind that you are only spending it on transport to be able to earn that income in the first place. So, you can take away a whole lot of your income and say that is not income, it's just transport. So it has a massive, massive impact on households, and in particular on poor households.
Yeah. And so when you look at the transport costs, that obviously those have evolved over the last few years. What would you say are some of the major factors that are driving those changes?
Well, I think we have to have a look at fuel price volatility. I think that would certainly be one of them. I think we're used to seeing fuel prices go up and down. And as most people will say, you certainly feel the fuel cost when it goes up, but you don't often feel it when it goes down. So I'm not always sure that we're really feeling the price of the deflation, but only the inflation. I think we can also safely say that infrastructure and the state of infrastructure is driving costs. If you just think of potholes and traffic lights and those kind of aspects which influence the speed at which you can travel and the amount of fuel that you are using, those kind of things, it would certainly impact there, not to mention insurance costs and tire costs and maintenance costs. I think that we can look at congestion. We know our roads are more and more congested. There are more and more cars on the road. And congestion, of course, drives up costs to a huge extent. And I think also, we should not, underestimate the fact that in South Africa we have very, very long travel distances and commuting distances. And, it comes from a long history of poor spatial planning, but that spatial planning is perpetuated now, where you find that lower income people are living on the peripheries of the cities. So you will also find that there's enormous travel distances, and those must surely add to costs as well, just from a sheer distance perspective. So there's many things driving the increased costs, but certainly we find that they are increasing to unaffordable levels.
And of course, you've got services like taxis, trains, buses. Are those being priced fairly, considering all those operational costs? And also, often you hear, especially the lower working class, they want to use their trains, but because our trains have virtually really been non-existent for the longest time, and yes, they're beginning to come back now, and they end up then going for taxis, which is more expensive to travel using taxis as opposed to trains or even buses. So when you look at the pricing for some of those services, is that being priced fairly, considering the other costs, operational?
Yes, I think that, prices are always a difficult issue to discuss, particularly when one looks at achieving certain social aims within transport. So, I think certainly you can look at buses and trains and say that they are reasonable cost alternatives. And generally speaking, the prices for those would be subsidized and they would be affordable. But the problem is if you don't have a service which meets the requirements of what people need. So if you don't have a train service, or you have a bus service which only comes every hour, doesn't have the frequency or doesn't have the range that you need, you will certainly not be able to opt for that, and you would then be forced into opting for a more expensive mode like a taxi or a carpooling or something like that. So certainly I think that where we fail to provide proper public transport service and fully subsidized public transport services, you're certainly going to be impacting on the ability of people to achieve what they need to achieve in society, just access jobs and access health services and so on. So, it's one thing providing an affordable service, but it also has to be a service which meets the requirements of the users, and that means more frequent services, a wider range of services that access poor communities, provide opportunities for lower income communities, and so we can go on. So, taxis we know are certainly the more expensive mode of transport, but in many cases people don't have any options in being able in using taxis, as that would be the only service that is available to them. So in a way they are captive to a higher price.
Okay. And of course there's an impact that all these rising transport costs have on especially lower income communities that rely heavily on public transport daily. The impact just affects the entire value chain.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I want to sort of take it further than that and say that it impacts people's lives and whether they are able to participate in society whatsoever. I know there are many cases of people who are excluded from job seeking, for example, simply because they cannot afford the transport. And sometimes when they do get a job, they are unable to sustain the transport costs. So it will definitely have knock-on effects into the ability to earn income, the ability to, I mentioned, access to health services or education services, with many communities deciding that they will walk all the way, which is not practical when you have long distances. And people just opting only to make the most essential trips, like taking a child to a hospital, by transport. Otherwise, you're constrained in what you're doing, and socially excluded from normal societal activities.
And you spoke of carpooling earlier on, and I was just thinking, with all the rising costs of fuel and maintenance, I wonder if owning a private vehicle is still economically viable for most South Africans.
Yes, I think I can take that from two angles. I think the one is that it just does become more and more expensive to own a vehicle, but I think one should also just bear in mind that the people that are most likely to fall out of that market are the people who are marginal users at best. So they're only just managing to hold onto a vehicle, and as the costs rise, you will find them falling out of the market. But that does mean that they will then be severely constrained in terms of where they can access. Such people will typically be falling to the taxi industry or the bus industry. But of course, if those are not available, then again you will have a problem. In itself, I think I've mentioned that I would take it from two angles. It's not a bad idea from a transport economic perspective to reduce the number of cars on the road. But having said that, one doesn't want to put in punitive measures. So if you would like to reduce the number of cars on the road, it's very, very, very important to provide excellent public transport services and things that are viable alternatives to cars. So I think the point is that, if people fall out of the market, they must, the car market, they must be able to still have access to everything that they did before, rather than falling out of the market into nothing. So it's about, we still have to maintain that mobility and accessibility that a car provides, and that means excellent public transport.
Let me take some WhatsApp voice notes that have come through. Let's start with this one.
Morning, Clement, and your guest there. If we had public transport like in Europe, I wouldn't be having a car. I've retired and I have to pay the insurance. My car goes out at times twice a week, or some days it doesn't even go out. So I'm just paying a tracker. The insurance is so expensive, and I can't even get a lesser quote because these insurances looks like they're colluding. So it's so bad. So I have to keep my car because I can't use the Ubers and all that. I don't like them. That's Veronica from Spragueview. Bye-bye.
Oh, yeah. I'm Veronica. Imagine just keeping the car. And if we had a well-functional public transport system, you would have to be paying for that tracker, for that insurance, for that vehicle. Do you find, Professor Luke, that we are seeing a lot, or let me say this, do you find that there's enough investment in sustainable transport options? I mean, even government itself, is it putting in the investment for us to see a well-functioning transport sector?
No, I think we can safely say that there's not nearly enough investment. And, I know it's difficult, and I know we have money constraints and so on, but to me, I think you have to ask the question, you pay for transport whether you invest in it or not, and you pay it in different ways, such as if you're not investing in good public transport systems, you're paying for it in emissions and congestion and productivity and health costs and accident costs. So the costs are there. And we need to invest a lot more in public transport. We need to make sure that the viable options and that they've got, good market coverage, and that they reach the lower income communities. And we need to invest a lot. And not just that, we need to invest in, bigger transport systems, because as much as we rely on the taxi system, a taxi can ultimately only carry 15 passengers. A bus can carry 60. A train can carry 1,000. And so you can continue. And as the cities grow and become, Johannesburg is a massively growing city, so you cannot think of small solutions. Ultimately, you have to start thinking about big solutions, and we need to look into the future and how the city will evolve and invest accordingly. We cannot invest according to the issues that we have on the table now, and certainly that needs investment in itself. But we've got to think about how the city is going to evolve and how we're going to cope with it, because otherwise you have a situation where you just have gridlock and the city can't move and people can't move, and you have a complete lack of productivity. So we need a lot more investment in public transport. And just to reiterate, you're going to pay for transport whether you invest in it or not. So it's better to be able to invest in the kind of future that we would like to see.
Yeah, I've got a question here from someone who's asking about the transport costs in South Africa and how they compare with other African countries. Are you able to answer that?
I think not too definitively, but I think I can say that transport costs in Africa are generally high, mainly because we have similar kind of issues, a high reliance on informal transport. We have long travel distances, poor infrastructure, and so on. But I think we should also just bear in mind that in South Africa we have a city like Johannesburg, which is hugely congested and growing at a massive rate. So within such a city, you would find the problems becoming more exacerbated at that level. But it's not unusual for where we see things in Africa. But I think also, there is a move in several African cities to invest more in mass transit systems, and I think this is the only way out for us if we are going to try and keep these costs down. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. Let me take Martin, who is calling us from Chiawelo. Martin, good morning.
Clement.
Sure, man. Go ahead.
When there was still a Minister of Transport, they had a blueprint about trains operating 24 hours. I don't know what happened to that blueprint because he told people that people who are looking at work, they'll get a train. And when they arrive at that destination, they'll find buses waiting for them to ferry them net to their homes. I don't know what happened to that blueprint because we are struggling about what we are discussing now. We are spending so much in taxis. We are spending so much in Ubers. And we are pensioners, some of us.
No, true, Martin. Professor Luke, were you aware of that report? I mean, there have obviously been big plans from the side of government, trains operating 24/7. But that takes us back to that question I asked earlier about investment. You need enough investment in public transport infrastructure. And for as long as you're not investing in that, all these other plans are just going to be a pipe dream.
Yes, and I think that is exactly the point. I think we have to look at that investment in order to build those. I think that rail will struggle because people don't trust rail anymore, and they don't trust it to be reliable. So it's difficult to get high ridership numbers and so on. So you've got to start off by offering a frequent and reliable service, without which you will not be able to build into these longer services. I certainly know that, transport policies over the years have said over and over, let's extend the working hours. But the reality is that if you are trying to catch a bus at 4 o'clock in the morning or a train at 10 o'clock at night, there are very little options available to you. And, that then leads you back into more expensive modes of transport, as your listener correctly said. So, you've got to be able to build up a service which people feel that they can rely on, that is always available to them, that has the frequencies and the coverage that they want. And from there you can build into longer working hours and night services and so on. But I think at the moment you just need a lot more investment that has to happen at that level.
Yeah, Professor Rose Luke, thank you so much for guiding us through this important conversation. Professor Luke is a transport economist with the University of Johannesburg. It's 11:31.
Every time you tune into 702,
You're not just listening.
you're making a difference
We turn words into actions that change communities.
and bring us closer to the South Africa we want to be. Every step counts.
So keep walking with us.
702,
Let's walk the talk.
streaming on the Prime Media Plus app, DSTV channel 856.
And 92.7 and 106 FM.